again, you call yourself a moral and social conservative, and unapologetically so, but you're not a Tory. In fact, you're very hostile to the modern Tories.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it calls itself the Conservative Party. If it called itself the Socialist Workers' Party, I wouldn't have anything against it.
It's not it's not a left-wing
It's
party.
It is a left-wing party. It's egalitarian. It's got much more in common with the SWP than it has with Conservatives.
Do you think the...
I often hear David Cameron and George Osborne coming out with things which I used to say when I was a trot.
Well, let's think about
The difference is that I knew when I said them that they were Trotskyist things to say. They have no idea. They are left-wing, but they don't know they're left-wing.
But do you think...
Which is even more alarming in some ways. At least Jeremy Corbyn knows he's left-wing.
You've called for the breakup of the Conservative Party before. Do you stand by
I hope that it would break up. I simply underestimated the enormous power of lies and money, which enabled the Conservative Party to obtain a victory in the elections.
The last time I addressed this wonderful body was in Manchester at the Conservative Party conference, where I received a reception so frozen for what I said that I came to believe in man-made global cooling. For what I said was this, that the only future for this country was the destruction of the Conservative Party. And that those present, and I wasn't joking, and those present should make sure that under no circumstances whatsoever at all should they ever vote for that disgraceful, treacherous body again. If there is to be any serious discussion of the things that the people in this room want, it has to begin here, on this topic and at this point. How is it that we are to bulldoze this dreadful anti-British party out of the way, to destroy it, and to replace it with something which will seriously represent our desires and will rescue this country from its enemies?
Well, I think there's no question you're right about that, because Mr Farage began by saying quite correctly that it was 6 against 1. 6 establishment parties, 6 pro-European Union parties, 6 pro-mass immigration parties, 6 parties completely steeped in the liberal Blairism which infects them all. And he was the one alternative. I mean, many of us have criticisms of Mr Farage, but he did actually put across a point of view which is simply not represented properly in Parliament.
The scale of the deficit, the problems that we had economically, meant those comparisons were being made. Now, after 5 years, we've created, thanks to the hard work of the British people, 1.9 million new jobs, 1,000 jobs created every day.
We were never in the economic depths that Greece is in today. I'm sorry,
that's a
completely fallacious comparison.
We were certainly facing big economic difficulties, and it's certainly the case.
Can we stop this record ever? It's not true. This country is £1.5 trillion in debt.
Yes.
Which it wasn't when you took over. There has been no increase in productivity. There has been no increase substantially in exports. There has been instead an enormous increase in immigration, a vast number of low-wage jobs. All they've done is they've created a low-wage economy and a lot of statistics and a lot of borrowed money. And to proclaim this as an economic triumph is particularly irresponsible, because when the election's over, they'll be back to you again saying, hey, look, things are really terrible and we're going to have to introduce all kinds of tax rises and spending cuts we never mentioned before. Now they're saying it's a triumph. In 6 months' time, they'll be admitting what it really is. 1.5 trillion national debt is incredible.
With public services stretched to the max, do we now say that the country is full?
Do we now say the country is full? Peter Hitchens.
Well, yes, it is. And I think the country simply wasn't designed for the level of population that it has, in terms of housing, in terms of transport, in terms of education, in terms of health provision. We simply haven't got enough. And both the major parties, but all 3 major parties, have got together in this belief that large-scale immigration is part of the solution of the economic problems they've created. What they've never understood is that actually you can't impose on people this level of mass immigration.
In direct answer to the lady's question, is Britain full? No, it is not full. The nurses and doctors who care for us, in many cases, come from outside the United Kingdom and outside the European Union. And I think that the debate on immigration has been poisoned by those who say that we should pull up the barriers. We need a balanced approach which works in Britain's interests and shows us to be the generous and open nation that I've always believed us to be.
Right.
But Michael, why aren't we, you say we should bring people in from abroad to do these things, why aren't we training our own teachers and our own nurses? And why is it morally acceptable to plunder poor countries of their trained people, who they've spent a fortune on training to bring them here? And also, how is it that in all this growth of employment, there are still almost 1 million, as you should know, having been an education secretary, almost 1 million people, young people, not in education, employment or training?
Jackie Lloyd, what do you think?
Why is that so?
What changes, though, now?
What ought to change is both those parties, which are in any case political corpses, propping each other up with each other's rigor mortis, collapse and are replaced, as they should have been long ago, by new parties which actually reflect the real divisions in the country.
OK, but that's something that doesn't happen quickly.
No, that is what ought to happen. But they don't speak for their own voters.
We don't have... Let's also talk about the Conservative Party, though.
Oh, yes, let's.
Well...
I dislike them even more.
Well, and this is where it all began. David Cameron promised this referendum. Now that's lost him his job, or will do come October. Then what? These big beasts of the cabinet who were so split, what happens? Do they work together? What happens?
This is a dead party. It's just been proved beyond doubt that this party does not speak for its own voters.
But for now, it is still in government. It's got to keep going. What does it do in the next few months?
It's there by virtue of broadcasting rules which give it prominence it doesn't deserve, and money supplied to it by various dodgy billionaires.
Or the people want you to be Peter instead.
Maybe they will. That's up to them. But they certainly don't like the two main parties.
Those who feel disillusioned with the current political system, what would you say?
Are right to do so. They have been systematically betrayed, and I see no end to it. There are so many issues which have been visited on this country by an elite of self-selecting, closed-minded people, as well represented here this evening, and actually largely incompetent as well, which have done enormous damage to our way of life. So, for instance, who now has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country and the destruction of manufacturing jobs under the Thatcher government? Who can reverse it? Who can do anything about it? Who will say anything on this panel about the catastrophe of mass immigration, which has changed this country irrevocably into somewhere completely different from what it was? They won't talk about it. They won't talk seriously about the immense problems of crime and disorder, which affect millions of people in their homes and leave them utterly vulnerable to all kinds of unpleasantness and violence and menace, which they never used to have to undergo. And there is no sense whatsoever that there will be any reform of the criminal justice system or any attempt to put it right again. These are just some of the subjects
but why do you think
on which this elite just constantly refuse to discuss.
Why?
Why? Because they themselves have an ideology. They themselves have the ideology of metropolitan bourgeois bohemians. They despise most people outside.
What are you, man of the people?
They despise them. Well,
I mean, you're the only person on this panel.
I'm no more a man of the people than you are.
I don't claim to be, but you're making a pitfall on here.
I'm simply saying these are the things which they will not do anything about, which they will not do, because they themselves benefit. They themselves benefit from many of the things which do immense damage. They've benefited from globalisation. They've benefited from mass immigration.
Let's talk about mass immigration. Let's talk about immigrants coming over here, propping up our NHS, treating us
They're not affected. They're not affected. Their children don't go to bog standard comprehensives. They're not affected. They're not affected by. They're not affected. They're not affected by crime. Yes, I do know how I'm talking about, because I know what they do all the time. They will not discuss these things. They will not do anything about them. They ignore what you say, and you think that at general election time you can do something about it. No, the people who stand before you at general election time for the political parties are people who've been pre-selected. You have no control. If I stood for Parliament, or if he stood for Parliament, from our positions, which are quite popular, the fact is the party machines would erase us. The immense amounts of money they're capable of spending, the enormous access they have to the broadcasting organisations, which we don't have most of the time, would make it impossible. Make it impossible.
You've got more access than I have,
would make it impossible. On the contrary, would make it impossible for anyone outside
Peter, sorry. The question was, what would you say to people who feel like you clearly do about the kind of political association?
Just said it.
Well, no, wait a moment. What would you say to them about how to change things? Are you going to stand as an MP?
I'm sorry.
Are you going to stand as an MP?
No, because for the reasons I've just explained, I wouldn't have the faintest chance. No, my advice to anybody young enough to do so is to emigrate before it's too late.
Oh, for goodness sake. I mean, this is just...
The paper that hates Britain, you heard it here.
This is a ridiculous count.
I might call you the man who hates Britain. After what you just said.
Exactly.
Anybody,
The Ed Miliband of our day.
feel free to call me.
I mean,
it's
not the Ed, the Rafe Miliband.
It's not Britain I hate, Britain I love, every field and hedgerow. It's the people who run it.
Or the people who live here.
And who are wrecking it. And,
all right.
and so, like anybody who cares about his country, I'm distressed by it. I see
no
hope from these interchangeable people. She was a Liberal Democrat. For all I know, she still is.
Let's hear from
I used to be very committed to a particular political objective, which was the destruction of the Conservative Party and its replacement by a genuinely patriotic and socially and morally conservative formation. But since then, I've really decided that politics has nothing to offer me, and I simply write the obituary of the country.